This is Warhawk Beyond 2040, and welcome to another edition of the comic book review series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the first 10 issues, including his debut of perhaps arguably the greatest, most legendary, iconic, decorated, respected, and popular superhero of all time. He is up there with Batman and Superman as not only a global phenomenon, but as a pop culture icon as well. Everybody knows who this guy is, even people who have never read a comic book in their life. They know who he is just by the mere mention of his name, and he has appeared in all forms of media, from animation to movies to computer games, you name it. This guy has seen it all and done it all, and he is one of the cornerstones of Marvel comic books. I am talking about, of course, the one and only, the Amazing Spider-Man. So, Spider-Man made his debut in Amazing Fantasty issue 15 in 1962, and he would shortly go on to have his own series of comic books. And this is a trade paperback graphic novel as part of the Mighty Marvel Masterworks series. And as I mentioned, this graphic novel compiles Spider-Man's debut and the first 10 issues of his original run. And this graphic novel features the debuts of some of the most important villains in Spider-Man's history. And in my opinion, I would say Spider-Man has one of the greatest collection of villains of all time. And I will put them up there with Batman's in terms of iconic status. And what we are going to do today is we are going to take a look at Spider-Man's debut and all 10 issues of the Wallcrawler himself. So there we are. Here's the original design of Spider-Man. So this is Spider-Man's debut, Amazing Fantasty issue 15, and it's the origin of Spider-Man. Now everybody knows Spider-Man's origin. Peter Parker got bitten by a radioactive spider, and he initially shied away from his responsibilities, which led to Uncle Ben getting murdered. And Peter Parker took on the vow that, as Spider-Man, he will not only protect the world, but stop crime as well. But it's interesting to see how Spider-Man's origin has changed so much over the years. And this is pretty much the original origin of Spider-Man. And, you know, as I said, it's changed a lot over the years, but the core of the origin has always remained the same. It's never really changed. There have been different versions, but this is the one that really kick-started the phenomenon known as Spider-Man. So let's have a look. So this introduces us to the debut of Flash Thompson, who is, you know, the school bully / school jock and the biggest Spider-Man fanboy ever. And there we see Peter Parker got bitten by a radioactive spider. You know, everybody knows this, but as I said, it's still interesting and cool to go back to the very beginning of how all of this started. The closest, I would say, to Spider-Man media that have stayed true to the origin is probably the 60s cartoon, because it was around this time as well. So there's Peter Parker getting into the wrestling business. So he started out as a wrestler first. Of course, everybody remembers that. And then Peter Parker would go on to make his webbing and the iconic red and blue suits that we all know and love. And of course, the infamous moments where Spider-Man fails to stop a criminal from escaping. We all know what happens here. Uncle Ben would be the casualty of the robber murdering him, and this leads to Peter Parker vowing to catch the killer, as you can see there. And then there's that great quote that we all know and love that's become the stuff of Spider-Man legends. With great power, there must also come great responsibility. And that's pretty much stuck with the Spider-Man mythos from the very beginning. So even though this is the first appearance of Spider-Man, as I said, this was issue 15 of Amazing Fantasy. So after Spider-Man's origin, he would get his own first issue, which was Amazing Spider-Man issue 1. And this would feature the debut of two very important characters, J. Jonah Jameson and the Chameleon. We'll get to those two in a minute. And we also get a cameo from the Fantastic Four, which we'll also talk about here as well. So in issue 1, it pretty much picks up where we left off from the end of Spider-Man's origin in Amazing Fantasy issue 15. And as I said, this is pretty much a continuation of that. So there's no actual bad guy in this issue. Now, J. Jonah Jameson is the editor and boss of the Daily Bugle, and he tries to, basically discredit Spider-Man's image. He's a menace, he's a criminal, all those sort of things that we all know Jameson. So he's not really a villain, he's just very stubborn. So he just wants Spider-Man out of the way. His attitude is, well, if he's such a hero, why doesn't he show his real face? So Jameson would go on to play a very important role in Spider-Man's history, and he was also instrumental in creating the villainous Scorpion as well. So there is Jameson. So this is just more or less Peter Parker dealing with trying to help his Aunt May with her money problems. As I said, there's no actual villain in the first issue. It's just more like the aftermath of Spider-Man's origin. So Spider-Man is more or less just tries to stop a space shuttle and tries to save it. As you can see there. So even though Spider-Man has saved the day, not everybody sees it that way. So again, Jameson discrediting Spider-Man. Now, this would also mark the first appearance of the Chameleon. Now, there are probably some people who may not know this, but the Chameleon is actually the first ever Spider-Man villain. And in the original source material, which you see here, there's been a number of versions of the Chameleon, but the original Chameleon, he just looked like this old-fashioned World War II fighter pilot with these goggles, green coat and scarf. And he was a master of disguise. He would use rubber masks, wigs, dark glasses, coats and shirts, different disguises to hide his identity while he would commit robberies. So, as I said, here is the first appearance of the Chameleon, right there. And we also treated to a cameo from the Fantastic Four as well. So in this issue, Peter Parker is looking for a job. He wants to help his Aunt May with her money problems. So he goes to the Fantastic Four and asks them for a job. This is something I'd like to see in a movie one day. So he goes to them for a job, and Reed Richards kindly just says to Spider-Man that, we're more like an independent organization, self-employed sort of thing. We kind of work for ourselves. We don't really work for anyone. So this leads to Spider-Man butting heads with the Thing and the Human Torch. More on that later. And it's a good fun story. So while this is all going on, Chameleon, as you can see there's the original Chameleon design. He's plotting his next move, and he's more or less going to try and frame Spider-Man. So Chameleon disguises himself as Spider-Man and basically frames him. And this wouldn't be the last time we see someone dress up as Spider-Man and try to frame him. Luckily for him, his spider senses are the difference maker, as you can see there. So Spider-Man tried to look for a job with the Fantastic Four. He was unsuccessful, but he was successful in capturing the Chameleon. And this wouldn't be the last time we would see the Chameleon in Spider-Man. he would go on to cause Spider-Man a lot of problems over the years. But luckily for him, he has his spider sense to rely on. Now, the next issue, which is issue 2, would introduce us to another important villain who would go on to become one of Spider-Man's greatest enemies, and that is Adrian Tombs, aka the Vulture. Now, the Vulture, for most of his history, has been portrayed as this ugly old looking man in a green bird suit, but he would be given the real cinematic treatment in 2017's Spider-Man Homecoming, played superbly by Michael Keaton. But, you know, as I said, there's been a number of different versions of the Vulture, and I've mentioned in the past that my favourite incarnation of the character is the Vulture who goes around stealing people's youth and making himself young again. I like that version, but it's cool to see how the Vulture got his start here. So there he is. He made his debut in issue 2 of the Amazing Spider-Man series. And this was called Duel to the Death with the Vulture. So there he is. As I said, the Vulture hasn't really changed that much in his long history. Ugly old looking man in a green bird suit. He's more or less like a gangster. So there we are. And there he is. I'm going to give you a closer look there. There he is. Yeah. As I said, in his history, he hasn't changed that much, other than in animation and in movies. So this would be Peter Parker making his debut working with the Daily Bugle, which would become his main job for most of the character's history, and working for J. Jonah Jameson. So he would work as a photographer for the Daily Bugle. So this is officially the first meeting of Spider-Man and the Vulture. And they'll go on to have many more legendary battles with each other. And as I said, you know, he was just pretty much an ugly old man. He was depicted as quite silly, but he would become a bit more scarier in later years. So he's a little bit of a silly villain, really. And we will also be introduced to another villain, and he was just more or less like a throwaway villain. Tinkerer, you can see there. Not much of a villain. Again, I think he was just more or less like this mad scientist. And yeah, that's pretty much what he was, really, just this mad looking scientist. And you know, he was just more or less like a throwaway villain. And he had looked like aliens working with him as well. As I said, he was just like a one-shot villain. He was never used again after this issue. Yeah, let's see. So it's just more or less Spider-Man fighting aliens. Yeah, nothing special here. Now, this would bring us to the next issue, issue 3, and this would introduce us to one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains, Dr. Octopus. So this is Dr. Octopus's origin. And we also get a little appearance from the Fantastic Four's Human Torch as well. So this is pretty much telling us how Dr. Octopus got the mechanical tentacles, as you can see there. So, just like in most versions, there was an explosion, the tentacles welded to his back, and there you have it. Now, Doctor Octopus, for many years before the Green Goblin appeared, I would probably say Doctor Octopus was Spider-Man's biggest enemy. I mean, he was in a lot of stories. I'd probably put him up there with the Green Goblin. He's one of Spider-Man's biggest villains. There's the wrath of Dr. Octavius, Dr. Octopus. So yeah, Dr. Octopus has been pretty much, for most of his history, just a renegade mad scientist. And he's a cool villain. Depending on how he's written, he's a really good villain. Yeah, Johnny Storm's Spider-Man, little do they know they will go on to become the best of friends in later years, almost like brothers. But it's funny how they initially just rub each other up the wrong way, because Johnny Storm is a bit of a show-off, and Spider-Man can be a bit of a show-off too. So it's quite funny. There we are. That's how he learns to defeat Dr. Octopus. It wouldn't be the last time these two meet each other. There you go, Dr. Octopus is defeated, and Human Torch and Spider-Man look like they become friends, but time will tell. So we're introduced to another classic Spider-Man villain, this time in issue 4, and that is the Sandman. So issue 1, we've seen the debut of the Chameleon. Issue 2, we've seen the debut of the Vulture. Issue 3, we've seen the debut of Dr. Octopus. And now issue 4, we're introduced to the debut of the Sandman. So these first 10 issues pretty much introduce us to the classic Spider-Man villains. Obviously we'll see a lot more over the years, but these first 10 issues are just showing us the first appearances of some of these iconic Spider-Man villains. I loved what Spider-Man 3 did. I mean, say what you want about Spider-Man 3, it wasn't a perfect film, but one of the few things they did get right was the Sandman, as you can see here. Yeah, look, see, it's pretty much how he looked in the film. Not much different, really. I thought they did a really good job with this. So, Sandman, just for those of you who have seen Spider-Man 3, he's this crook who can turn his body into sand and make weapons out of his arms and, make himself big. He can do all these different things. Let's see. Good villain. I thought he was a very, very good villain. He can do all these weird, crazy things with his body out of sand. So, they got the origin right. Look at that. Brilliant. Got exposed to radiation through the sand. And there you go. So one of the few things, Spider-Man 3 did get right, aside from the others stuff, but they still got it right here. So there we go. Yeah, Sandman's just pretty much a 2-bit thug, really. He's not, he's up there, but I wouldn't say he's as iconic as the Chameleon or even Dr. Octopus, but he's an important villain and he's there for a reason. Yeah, he's doing his Sandman thing. That's one unique way I don't ever remember him doing. There's the classic Spider-Man flashlight. We only saw it once, which was in Captain America Civil War. That was like right at the very end in the post-credits scene. Peter Parker's more or less trying to stand up to Flash Thompson. There you go. Now, issue 5 would not necessarily introduce us to a debut, but a big villain nonetheless. He's more known as a Fantastic Four villain, but he has appeared in Spider-Man comics over the years. My favourite, Doctor Doom. Always loved Doctor Doom. You know. So Doctor Doom has always appeared in Spider-Man comics over the years. I just think he's a brilliant villain, you know, with the mask and the green robe and the mechanical bionic arms. I just think Doctor Doom is a fantastic villain. You know, again, they've never really got him right, but hopefully one day we will see him in the MCU. So there's Doctor Doom being Doctor Doom. Interesting to see a Fantastic Four villain interacting with Spider-Man. Don't really see it that often. Oh dear Lord. Oh no. Anyone who remembers the Spider Slayer episode, you remember what happened. Oh yeah. I can actually read this in Doctor Doom's voice. This is Doctor Doom, you know. Brilliant villain. Certainly deserves a lot more respect and love than what he gets. So Spider-Man's more or less going to try and stop Doctor Doom here. And Doctor Doom is pretty much what you expect, really. Just this evil ruler of Latveria / mad scientist. He's making all these weird molecules, you can see there. So Flash being the Flash, he's trying to impress Spider-Man. So we see Doctor Doom and Spider-Man going at it. There we go. Yeah. Oh dear. Look at that. Now the next issue, issue 6, would introduce us to another iconic Spider-Man villain. This would mark the first appearance of the Lizard. I've always liked the Lizard when he's done right. He's a scientist who Dr. Kurtz Connors lost his arm many years ago, and he injected himself with lizard serum and grew his arm back, and as a result of that turned himself into a lizard. Now the Lizard, over the years, he's been more or less like an out of control reptile, but in earlier versions he was a full-blown bad guy. I mean, look here. Very different Lizard to what we would come to know in later years. So this is I think this is the first appearance of Betty Brant, the secretary of J. Jonah Jameson. So yeah, this is like the debut of the Lizard, so they haven't quite met each other yet, but they're going to. As you can see, there he is. As I said, Lizard in the early days, he's a bit of a silly villain. I mean, he looked okay, but you know, he wasn't as scary as what we've come to know later. So here's a little bit of his origin. Pretty much what I was saying earlier. Let's see. Grows his arm back. Dum 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 dum. Dun, 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 dun. Yep. Turns into the Lizard. I would say the animated series of the 90s, Night of the Lizard, they pretty much stay true to this, more or less. I mean, they Made some slight changes, but it's more or less near enough the same. So there you go. And there's, I always remember that Lizard with his army of reptiles. But yeah, Lizard by this point in the original source material, he was just like more depicted as a villain. But in later years, he was just more or less out of control. And in Amazing Spider-Man 1, he was a proper villain. And Dr. Kurtz Connors was like a teacher slash mentor slash friend of Peter Parker. But here, I don't think they know each other. Or if they do, barely. So there's some more there of Lizard and Spider-Man. And he's pretty much restored back to normal by this point. For now, anyway. And Spider-Man saves the day. Now, issue 7, we would see the return of the Vulture. Here he is. The return of the Vulture. So it just pretty much picks up where we left off from the end of like issue 2. It's pretty much a continuation of that, as you can see. There you go. So yeah, it's just Vulture on the rampage as always. But as I said, Vulture in the early years, he was just more or less a silly villain. Wasn't really much of a physical threat, not like Sandman or Dr. Octopus. Chameleon's not really a physical threat, I'd say. You know, you just got to try and catch him when you can. But the Vulture, never really saw him as much of a threat to Spider-Man. So he's trying to kidnap Jameson. Yeah, I said, not much going on here, but it's still a fun story. Still pretty much a fun story. There we are. And here's Betty Brant. And this one is issue 8. Got another appearance of the Human Torch. Not really much going on here. This is called the Terrible Threat of Living Brain. So it's just basically a robot's out of control. And, you know, there's not really much else going on here. Bit of a silly story. You know, we've been introduced to like the main villains like the Chameleon, Dr. Octopus, Sandman, and the Vulture, and the Lizard. And, you know, we've even got a cool appearance from the Fantastic Four's Doctor Doom. But here, this is just more or less like a filler story, but it's alright. Not much to get your teeth into here. Some of these filler stories, it's just basically Peter Parker and Flash Thompson just rubbing each other up the wrong way, really. As I said, there's not much else going on here. I mean, in this issue, it's Peter Parker and Flash Thompson competing against each other in a boxing match. You know, go figure. Obviously, Peter has to try and hold back because, you know, can't let Flash know he's Spider-Man. Can't have that. So, meanwhile, he's dealing with this out-of-control robot. As you can see, not much else going on here. Yeah. This is definitely something you would have seen in the old animated series of the 60s. And then you got the next part is, you know, Spider-Man tackles the Torch, which has got an appearance on the Human Torch. See? And there's the Fantastic Four. So it's just more like a filler than anything else. You can see that. Yeah. Now, issue 9 would introduce us to another important villain, Electro. Now, Electro, everybody knows Electro. He's the power of electricity. And I think this is probably the first real threat Spider-Man faced. And, you know, in later years, he would appear in Amazing Spider-Man 2, and he recently appeared in Spider-Man No Way Home, and he was portrayed fantastically by Jamie Foxx. But this is a very different Electro to the one we saw in the movies. So this story is called The Man Called Electro. And I remember in some of these stories, Electro really gave Spider-Man some real problems. I think, as I said, this was the first real villain before Green Goblin. Really gave Spider-Man some major problems. So there he is. There's the first appearance of Electro, wearing the classic green and yellow suit. And he hasn't really appeared in much media. He appeared in the 60s cartoon. He had a couple of cameos in the 90s cartoon. And that was about it, really, until Amazing Spider-Man 2. So Peter's got to try and figure out a way how to stop Electro. So yeah, he was a big threat, but probably not as big of a threat as he would become in later years. But this is probably the first real serious villain Spider-Man took on at this point. So there he is. And there's the origin. So his real name is Max Dillon. He was working on a cable and he got struck by lightning while working on this electrical cable. And that's pretty much how he became Electro, really, as you can see. He's got his electrical generator harness. So Aunt May was a casualty of an Electro attack. As you can see there. I think at this point Electro was one of the few villains that actually came close to defeating Spider-Man, I recall. And this is how he defeats him. Good old-fashioned water. And we all know water and electricity don't go together, so very unique way of defeating a villain. So Electro is put away. Jameson gets his pictures. Everybody's happy. Or more or less. And this brings us to the final issue of the original run. And these guys never really appeared much in media, as far as I know. They're a group of thugs called the Enforcers. So here they are. They're just like a group of thugs, really. Nothing special here. There's the main boss, as you can see there. So yeah, they were nothing special really. They weren't like the Sinister Six or anything, but they were like the first group of villains, but they were just normal gangsters. So this is pretty much continuing on from the Electro issue. As you can see. There we go. So yeah, you got these. He's the muscle of the Enforcers. And obviously, he's the main guy. That guy there, he's the main guy of the Enforcers. There you go. So he more or less defeats them with tires. I have to give Spider-Man his props. You know, to fight this big much of villains is pretty impressive. So the Enforcers were more or less defeated. And there you go. That pretty much wraps up there. So there you have it. All 10 issues, including the debut of Spider-Man from his original run of 1962, The Amazing Spider-Man. Good. It's pretty good. A couple of filler stories I could probably do without, but by and large, yeah, it's pretty good. I quite enjoyed it. So, you know, cool to see some of the key villains, you know, like the Chameleon, Lizard, Electro, the Vulture, Dr. Octopus, you know, even an appearance from Doctor Doom as well. So that's pretty cool. So we got to meet some of the classic Spider-Man villains who've gone to become like legends in their own right. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What was your favourite issue from the first 10 issues of The Amazing Spider-Man? Was it issue 1 with the Chameleon? Was it issue 2 with the Vulture? Was it issue 3 with Dr. Octopus? Was it issue 4 with the Sandman? Did you like the Doctor Doom appearance in issue 5? What did you think of the appearance of the Lizard in issue 6? And also, what was your thoughts on Electro appearing in issue 8, 9? And also, what did you think of the appearances of the Human Torch and the Fantastic Four in these stories? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the comic book review series. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated.